Greetings from the county line. If you're a regular member here, a viewer, you know that we're not on the county line, and if you were here last month, you'll know why, because I've come into town from the country to try and find a major dude. Because as Steely Dan said in 1973, any major dude will tell you. And I found one at a place that I've come to love, a place that always makes me happy. And one of the reasons that it makes me happy is the gentleman that's agreed to join us today. Father Chris Shockley is the pastor at St. Patrick Church and also at our South Branch out in Alto. And the reason I came here is because I remembered that the humorist Dave Barry a number of years ago said that hobbies are all boring unless you're involved in that particular same hobby, and religions are the same way. So I found a guy who can actually make religion not only interesting but fun. So thanks for joining me.
A joy
Father
to be
Shockley.
with you.
And thanks for the beer. I appreciate it very much.
If we're going to talk deeply, we should talk over a good beverage.
I agree. So, in case people are just listening to this podcast, you're wearing a cleric.
Yep.
What does a priest do? What's a priest's job?
Oh, you like to start with the easy questions, don't you? A priest's job is more than a job. Like there is a job to being a priest, but it's also a life. And it's interesting to think about the two different aspects of it. Like, so there's the job of a priest is the celebrating the sacraments, the counseling people, when I say the sacraments, that's hearing confession, doing Mass, what other groups might call services. We don't do service just on Sunday. We have Mass on Sunday and every day of the week. We're preparing people for marriage. We're preparing people for baptisms. We're helping people learn about the faith. And then you have the role of the pastor, and the pastor has to run the parish. So as the pastor, I'm running the parish. I'm making the decisions that help the business that is that local church happen. No, nobody likes to think of a church as a business, but you know what? There's expenses, there's income, and there's people that like to have their paycheck come through. So there's a business operation that the pastor is in charge of. A priest may not be the pastor. We have two associate pastors, also called parochial vicars here, Father Peter and Father Nieder, and they don't have the job of running the parish. They get to just be a priest. Like they just have the job of doing the ministries in the community. They don't have to make the decisions about how do we run this, who do we hire, who do we fire, all of those tough calls. That's kind of the job of the priest, is a lot of the ministries and the serving people in different ways. The life of the priest is where he's called to be a father. That's why we refer to a priest as father. Okay. He's called to be a spiritual father. He's called to live a life that's different. It's why priests are celibate. They don't get married. It's why priests are called to pray the liturgy of the hours throughout the day. They're called to have their own personal prayer in addition to the prayers that are part of the services that we put on. Priests are called to live a life of availability to other people. That's part of that call of celibacy, is to be able to be available to people, because he doesn't have a family of his own he's focused on. The church is his family.
What attracted you to the priesthood?
The honest answer is that God wouldn't quit nagging. I had thought about being a priest when I was a younger man. Well, not younger man, when I was a kid. I thought about it in high school, and I kind of put it to the side because I was thinking, I'm just being prideful. I'm just thinking that I want this position because I want to be important. And so I put it to the side, and I came back to it in college when I was about 21 years old. I was praying about asking a girl out, and God kept putting on my heart the idea of, you need to think about going to seminary. You need to think about, I'm like, God, you're not listening. You're not listening. But probably the person who wasn't listening was me. And I argued with God for months, and finally I said, all right, fine. I'm going to go to seminary to prove I'm not called to be a priest. Well, we see how that one worked out.
So what were you studying in college when
I was studying computer
nagging
science.
got a hold of you? I'm sorry?
I was studying computer science. I was studying to be a computer programmer. I was at the
Were you good at it?
I was good at it. I was part of the great university of Purdue University. And I enjoyed programming, but I also had a nagging feeling in me of like, okay, what difference is this going to make in someone's life? Like, what kind of difference am I really going to make? And the answers I could give myself didn't satisfy me. So, I mean, there was some kind of like, okay, I'm good at this. I do well at this. Some of the kids in the honors program would actually be asking me to help debug their code. Even when I went to seminary, they still asked me to debug their code. So, I mean, it was something I was good at, but it didn't satisfy my heart. And the more I got into seminary, probably 2-3 years into seminary is when I really decided, yeah, I do want to be a priest. It was much more a realization of how God's calling me to the vocation that's going to satisfy my heart the most.
And what's involved in becoming a priest?
A lot. The process of becoming a priest is not just a simple, you decide you want to be a priest. It's a mutual discernment between the diocese or religious order that you're joining. I'm part of the Diocese of Lafayette in Indiana, and the man himself. Like, I have to say I feel called, and the diocese has to say they see a call in me. And so there has to be a mutual agreement. It's a lot like dating. Like, you're kind of like dating the church. And it's about an 6 to 8 year process, depending on how much education you've had before you start the process. I transferred after 2 years at Purdue, so I lost a year in the transfer, so I ended up with a 7-year process. I had 3 years of college seminary, getting a degree in philosophy with a minor in classical languages. And then I went on to 4 years of graduate studies where I got a Master of Divinity degree, which pretty much every priest gets, and a Master of Arts in Theology focused in Scripture Studies. And one part of it is getting these degrees. Another part of it is a prayerful discernment the whole time. Is this what God's calling me to? And at the same time, there's active ministry that you're doing along the way, visiting the sick in the hospital, teaching religion in a Catholic school, teaching Sunday school, various different service, visiting a nursing home, various different services that you're providing to the community through this time to say, am I ready for all that a priest has to do? And you're never fully ready, but you're still at the same time kind of discerning the whole time. Is this what God is asking of me? And so for 6 to 8 years, you're discerning it, the faculty at the seminary are discerning it, and some of the leadership of the diocese are discerning, do we see this? And everybody has to basically say yes for you to be ordained. Just like you can ask a girl to marry you, you can't force a girl to. Like, you both have to come to a mutual agreement, this is good for both of us.
So it's not like ROTC where you get your education paid for and you're committed 4 years to serve. You're in for life. And
you're in for life. It's a vocation, it's a calling, it's a life, it's not just a job.
And then there's the celibacy thing.
Celibacy thing, honestly, people always think that the celibacy thing is going to be the hardest thing. You ask any priest who's been a priest for a long time, the obedience thing is the harder thing. Like, to make a promise that for life, wherever the bishop sends me is where I'm going to go. So I've been in a few different assignments. I had 5 happy years in Crawfordsville, and then now I'm 4 years into being here in Kokomo and hoping to be here for 10 more years, but it's always at the will of the bishop. Where does he want me or where does he need me? That can be a hard thing. Celibacy is honestly a little bit of a freedom thing of being able to be freely available to families by not having a family of your own. And in the discernment process of seminary, you have to discern, can I live that life? Can I live that life where I don't get married, where I don't have kids of my own? That was a hard thing in the seminary days to give up. One of the things I realized over time was God's given me a heart that wouldn't be satisfied with only one family to love. And as a priest, you're invited into so many families to be a part of their family. Though if the kids get annoying, I get to go back to my rectory and sleep peacefully. God bless you, parents. God bless you who have day in, day out with your children. They're great in short bursts, but you don't get that break. Thank God for you.
Like being a grandparent.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, if you think those questions were tough, the rest of them might be easy for you, but they're things that I think a lot of people struggle with. I struggled with faith for decades, and every time I thought I was interested in understanding more about Christianity, I'd pick up a Bible, and I'd always start at the beginning, in the beginning, where it talks about how God made everything around us out of nothing, and then we wind up in a garden with a couple of naked people and a talking snake, and then God leads the Jews to the promised land, which turns out to be the only country in the Middle East that doesn't have any oil. And the whole thing was, and it's a lot going on, and it's a lot of characters. You almost need a spreadsheet to follow it.
Oh, yeah.
Why is the Old Testament, in the first place, how can somebody who is interested in Christianity even begin to understand what's going on?
Well, great question. The Bible is of utmost importance to us as Catholics and to all Christians. And the problem for most people, though, is the Bible was not written as a book, period. Like, it wasn't written as a book. The Bible is a collection of books. And frankly, normally you get a book and you think, okay, I'm going to start with page 1 and I'm going to read through the book. And most people who do that will read, okay, they get into Genesis and like, okay, I can understand most of what's going on in Genesis. They get to Exodus and it's the story of the people, the Israelites getting out of Egypt and settling in the Promised Land. And then you get into the rest of the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books, and you start going, I have no idea what they're talking about. The first 2 books flow fairly easily if somebody's reading as if this was one big book. The latter books, Deuteronomy, Numbers, they're a lot harder. Leviticus especially is hard for people to read through and go, what am I supposed to even get out of this? These books were not written as one book for you to read through front to back. And frankly, most of the Old Testament is not a great beginning spot to begin reading the Bible. Like, that's where a lot of people try to begin because it makes sense. Let's begin in the beginning. But the books of the Old Testament are largely written in a context of for posterity's sake. These are being written down so that we can remember all that God did or all that God instructed. They're not written towards a community or a specific person, and so they come off fairly dry at times because it's written down more like, we don't want to forget this, we don't want to forget that, we don't want to forget this, but it's kind of a generic we. If you begin and you want to begin understanding the faith, the New Testament is a much better place to begin reading the Bible. And then later, after you've read through the New Testament, to read the Old Testament, and it starts giving you context to all of these things. The New Testament, every book of the New Testament was written towards a specific audience. The book of Matthew was written towards a Jewish audience. The book of Luke was written towards a specific person, Theophilus. The Gospel of Mark was written towards people who are hearing about the faith for the first time, particularly from a Greek perspective. the book of John was written towards Christians who've been Christian for a while, but also are looking for understanding, a deeper understanding of what happened in the time of Christ, in his actual lifetime. The letters are written towards specific communities during the early centuries, and the book of Revelation is written towards a specific community. So all of these invite you in more because it sounds like it's written to you. When the books are just written for whomever may read this sometime in the future, we don't want to forget these things. Much of the Old Testament has that kind of tone of being a this happened, this happened, this happened history text. The New Testament books are written towards a community to say, I want you to understand what we believe and why. I want you to understand what happened. And so the New Testament books are much more inviting. I tell people, if you're really beginning to read the Bible, start with the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is the shortest of all the Gospels. It is a action-adventure version of the Gospel because it kind of cuts out a lot of the narrative and just says, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then Jesus said this, then Jesus said that. It carries you through much more quickly. And if you've read the Gospel of Mark, you've got kind of a feel for, okay, this is the framework of the Gospel. Then I encourage people to read either Matthew or Luke, and then the other one, and then read John. Matthew, Mark, Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because you kind of see them together. Each was speaking to a different community, emphasizing different things. John's kind of going deeper. Like his was written much later, and it gives you a much deeper sense of what this is all about.
Why is reading the Bible important to people who want to live good lives?
I would say yes. Why is reading the Bible?
I mean, there's a lot of people who think, I don't need to go to church. I don't need the Bible. I don't need, because I'm a good person without all that. How does reading the Bible help?
There's a 1970s comedy that had, I can't remember which name it is, but one of the main characters was brought with that basic question of like, Mama, we don't have to go to church to be good, and her response was, yeah, you also don't have to have a parachute jumping out of a plane, but it sure helps.
I like that.
The Bible brings together much of what the Christian faith is. Can somebody do good things with having never read the Bible? Yes. As Catholics, we believe God is influencing everybody. Like God has an influence even with people who've never read the Bible. And he's leading them towards himself. He's going to lead them towards the truth. And he is the truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And yet he's given us the scriptures to help us understand that and to keep passing down in an authoritative manner. This is what it is to be good. Because honestly, like, across centuries, across cultures, there's been a lot of disagreement about what it means to be good. And if you don't have an agreement about that, you may do some good things, but are you truly becoming a good person if you are doing the right thing for the wrong reason? And the Bible challenges us. G.K. Chesterton had a saying, I don't need religion to tell me I'm right when I'm right. I need religion to tell me I'm wrong when I think I'm right. And that's one of the things that reading the Bible does, is it challenges you to not just see what you think is good, but really ask the question, what does the God who created us say is good?
I think a lot of people have trouble with the Bible because the stories seem so fantastic. It's the Old Testament. It seems so fantastical. I mean, the talking snakes and the guy building a huge boat without the benefit of YouTube.
Yep.
Do Christians believe in science, and does science agree with the creation story?
So, do Christians believe in science? Does science agree with this creation story? Two interesting, deep questions. I'll speak honestly. Some Christians do not believe in science. is that authentic Christianity? Well, I think there's a serious question there. Catholic Christians do believe in science. We believe that all truth points us to God, and God is the origin of all science and truth. And in fact, it's interesting that the word science basically goes to the Latin root of the word to know. Like, science basically just means knowledge. And what are you to know except for the truth? And Christ is the truth. So all truth guides us towards him. How does science and faith align, especially with things like the creation story? Interesting thing about the creation story is reading the context of the genre of what it's written in. We read those things as early 21st century Americans. It wasn't written for us. It was written for the community. It was written for thousands of years ago, and it was recording what God wanted revealed to people. And it's not about saying this is how God created everything, but speaking to the fact that God did create everything. And when you get into the creation story being a 7-day creation story, much of the early chapters of Genesis are written with a symbolic language where the literal meaning, not the literalist meaning, but the literal meaning of it is in the context of its genre. You have to hear the symbolism of those numbers. When we hear 7 days as 21st century Americans, we focus on the word days. And it's like, God created everything in just 24-hour periods, and that's not what the people it was written to would hear. Sorry. The people who it was written to, the number 7 was an important symbolic number that meant perfection. So what they hear in God creating in 7 days is that God took the perfect amount of time to create. Not that it was 7 24-hour periods or even 7 periods of the same amount of time, but that God took the perfect amount of time to create everything. And that the culmination of creation is humanity. Like, that's what Genesis is saying. The things that people think are God, such as the planets and the stars and the sun and the moon, those are all creations of the one true God. These things that other cultures are saying are gods, sometimes animals, sometimes fish, like all these things, God created them. And the culmination of creation is humanity. And at the same time, God took the perfect amount of time to do all this. That's what the 7 days of creation is speaking of. And so you sometimes have to be deeply studied in the scriptures to be able to understand some of the symbolic numbers or phrases that are used. But faith and science go hand in hand. One of my favorite sci-fi shows is written by a fallen away Catholic. The sci-fi show is called Babylon 5. And it's a 90s show that only geeks and nerds know about. So I'm well-versed in it.
Computer science guy.
Computer science guy. But there's a phrase they have in one episode where one of the characters says, faith and reason are like the shoes on your feet. You can travel further with both.
Well, with that, we're going to conclude this episode, but when you come back, and I hope you will, Father, for the rest of the month. We got Father all month to talk to us about the Catholic faith, and we're going to hopefully see next week why we believe.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for enjoying a beverage with me. God bless.